Happy Thursday. I just began making Hamandaschen cookies for Purim. That is a Yiddish word, Haman, for the gentleman that we've been reading about here in Esther. Maybe I'm mispronouncing it when I say Haman, maybe it is Haman. But the Dashen is Yiddish for pockets. And if you remember in chapter 3, after he came to the king and requested that the king put out an edict for the Jews, he said that he offered to make payment. So Dashen in Yiddish means pockets. So Haman Dashen is Haman or Haman's pockets. Interesting. This evening we are going to be in chapter 8 of Esther. On that day, King Ahasuerus gave the house of Haman, the enemy of the Jews, to Queen Esther, and Mordecai came before the king because Esther had disclosed what he was to her. Then the king took off his signet ring, which he had taken away from Haman, and gave it to Mordecai, and Esther set Mordecai over the house of Haman. Then Esther spoke again to the king, fell at his feet, wept, and pleaded for his compassion to avert the evil scheme of Haman the Agagite and his plot which he had devised against the Jews. And the king extended the golden scepter to Esther. So Esther got up and stood before the king. Then she said, "If it pleases the king, and if I have found favor before him, and the matter seems proper to the king, and I am pleasing in his sight, let it be written to revoke the letters devised by Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, which he wrote to eliminate the Jews, who are in all the king's provinces. For how can I endure to see the disaster which will happen to my people? And how can I endure to see the destruction of my kindred?" So King Ahasuerus said to Queen Esther and to Mordecai the Jew, "Behold, I have given the house of Haman to Esther, and they have hanged him on wooden gallows because he had reached out his hand against the Jews. Now you write to the Jews as you see fit in the king's name, and seal it with the king's signet ring. For a decree which is written in the name of the king and sealed with the king's signet ring may not be revoked." So the king's scribes were summoned at that time in the 3rd month, that is the month Sivan, on the 23rd day, and it is written in accordance with everything that Mordecai commanded the Jews, the satraps, the governors, and the officials of the provinces which extended from India to Cush, 127 provinces, to every province according to its script, and to every people according to their language, as well as to the Jews according to their script and their language. He wrote in the name of King Ahasuerus and sealed it with the king's signet ring, and sent letters by couriers on horses, riding on royal relay horses, offspring of racing mares. In the letters, the king granted the Jews who were in each and every city the right to assemble and to defend their lives, to destroy, kill, and eliminate the entire army of any people or province which was going to attack them, including children and women, and to plunder their spoils. On one day in all of the provinces of King Ahasuerus, on the 13th day of the 12th month, that is the month Adar, a copy of the edict to be issued as law in each and every province was published to all the peoples, so that the Jews would be ready for this day to avenge themselves on their enemies. The couriers, hurrying and speeded by the king's command, left riding on the royal relay horses, and the decree was issued at the citadel in Susa. Then Mordecai went out from the presence of the king in a royal robe of violet and white, with a large crown of gold and a garment of fine linen and purple. And the city of Susa shouted and rejoiced, for the Jews there was light, joy, jubilation, and honor. In each and every province and in each and every city, wherever the king's commandment and his decree arrived, there was joy and jubilation for the Jews, a feast and a holiday. And many among the peoples of the land became Jews because the dread of the Jews had fallen on them. So everything that belonged to Haman was then given to Esther and to Mordecai. Everything that he owned was then turned over. But that still wasn't enough, because as it said, a law that was put in place by the king, sealed with the king's signet ring, which we know happened when Haman asked for that original decree, cannot be revoked. whatever the king places as law remains as law. Just as the wages of sin is death. That has been since the beginning of creation and hasn't changed, which is why those that were in sin needed a restoration, needed the Messiah to come and to restore us back to the condition that we originally were in the garden. Nothing has changed here. So they cannot revoke the original law that the king put in place, but he can now place another law next to it, stating that now they have a right to defend themselves. They have a right to come against anyone, any army, any person, age, race, decree, doesn't matter, that comes up against them. They have a right to do just the same to them, which is kill them, because that was the initial decree, was to annihilate the Jews. So if somebody attacks them, they have a right to defend themselves to the death. And then they also are able to take their spoils, take everything that belonged to that person to be their own. So there's an added bonus there to possibly deter people, not only the fact of, I don't want to die, because now it's not just me coming at them and it's just a free-for-all. But not only could I potentially die, but I could potentially lose everything, my entire family, everything gone. And it would wipe me from, or wipe the person from the planet, essentially. So just imagine what it must have been like for the Jews. It's not completely erased, but at least now you and your countrymen, if you band together and protect one another, you have a fighting chance. It says, for the Jews, there was light, joy, jubilation, and honor. They created a holiday to remember, and they have a feast and a holiday. And that continues to this day as a remembrance of this time, of Queen Esther, of Mordecai, of God making a way for her to enter into a kingdom that she should never have been in, and be selected as the queen by receiving favor from the eunuch and receiving his guidance so that she would be selected by the king and stand out amongst all the other ladies, and then to be able to come to the king, not just once but twice in his presence prior to him extending that scepter to her and living to tell about it. God is so amazing.